It's time to level up your learning experience.
It's time to level up.
Welcome to the Level Up Learning Show.
Hey everybody, Jarod Borman here, instructional designer for AEA Learning Online, and I am coming to you from my back deck. And I'm taking this show here because it is officially summer. A lot of educators are now taking that much needed R&R, rest and relaxation, somewhere wherever they are in order to recuperate and re-energize for the next school year. But we don't stop learning during the summer. Next level learners, we don't. That's what we do. So we always level it up. We take it to the next level, and we use this time to try to take our game and everything we do to another level through maybe reading. There are a lot of conferences that are going on over the summer. People are probably listening to a lot of podcasts or shows like this one in order to gain a better understanding of how they may be able to level up their learning. As you may recall in the previous episode, we had Trevor Ragan on the show from the Learner Lab, and he was all about how could we take coaching and the coaching aspect to the next level and leveling that up. And the idea that he kind of brought to us was a lot of how do we maximize our practice time? How do we transfer the skills that we work on in practice over to the playing area, the game field, the court, whatever it may be. And then he also had some nice nuggets and research to back it all up. And so we wanted to take that same conversation, break it into two parts. And in this episode, I want to make sure we have enough time for the rest of the conversation that we had with Trevor. There's no show and tell. There's no banter with a co-host or anything like that. It is just getting right to the nuts and bolts of our conversation with Trevor Ragan of the Learning Lab and some really important, deep insight that he has when it comes to us as athletes and coaches and how we take everything that we do to another level.
It's time to level up.
We know that you'd like to talk about hardiness. Can you tell us the difference in hardiness and grit, and how can you instill that in coaches? In athletes.
We won't spend too much time on this because this is one of the deep dives that I'm on, but it's one of these topics that I think is forgotten, and I'm really curious to learn more. So obviously in education and sports, like grit has caught on, and so is like resilience. So I stumbled upon this topic called hardiness, and it's kind of died out because the main person who did the research passed away like a few years ago. And then the other people doing the research are basically only in the military, and they have no benefit. There's no upside of them sharing it with anyone else. It's like, no, we're good. We got this. Like it's important and we're using it. And so the difference is grit. The actual definition of grit is I will stay on a path towards a specific goal, and I will like continue on that path in order to achieve this specific goal. Is grit important? Yeah, of course it is. Hardiness is a little more general, which is I am good at dealing with the random challenges and changes that are thrown at me in life. So it's not just I will show resilience towards one particular goal. It's like I'm kind of good at dealing with challenges in general. So there is a bunch of overlap in some of the experiments they show. Like, yeah, if someone has developed grit, they'll probably score higher in hardiness, but there is a difference between the two things. The hard part is thinking about like, well, how do you develop hardiness? And I think that one avenue, and this works with grit as well, is like understanding growth mindset. And I know it's kind of a played out term, but it is important, which is just believing you can change is kind of essential if you're going to get good at dealing with change. But then the other one, and we have been talking about this kind of for 9 years, but the way that we talk about it now is much different, which is just our relationship with stress and discomfort and how we think about stress and discomfort. I would argue might be one of the most important things we could do that could help us build hardiness, help us build grit, and then even zooming out, help us get better at learning. So I think that's another really important piece that'll help us do that. But I haven't built the hardiness stuff that much into our workshop yet because I have a lot to learn. It's, again, something I'm digging into, but it is kind of interesting. And I think there is something there that will provide value to people once I kind of totally understand it.
Yeah, because that's a term that I would say that I'm not necessarily very familiar with in terms of coaching, even in terms of education in general. It's not a term that pops up. So, but the distinction between hardiness and grit, hardiness sounds a lot like another word that may be used in education, and that's like agility, the ability to be agile and to redirect as necessary when those particular forks in the road pop up. Would you agree with? I mean, does that sound about the same?
Yeah, there's overlap with all this. It gets kind of messy when you get really into like the specifics. But to be honest, like the overarching word that we all use is resilience. And even that, so like a few months ago, I interviewed like maybe the world's leading expert in resilience research. When I asked him, I go, my favorite question to ask any researcher, I go, what's the gap between what people say on LinkedIn and Twitter versus what the science says about this topic? And every time they're like, oh, let me tell you. And it's great. Like, and for resilience, he talked about a lot of them, but he goes, one of the biggest is the way a lot of people talk about resilience is, one, it's either something that is inside of you, like you have this trait, you're a resilient person. And he goes, there's no science that backs that up. He goes, resilience is not a trait that you have, it's a process you go through. And it's also not a step-by-step process. So a lot of people go, the 3 steps to resilience. And he's like, there's also no research that backs that up. He goes, true resilience is actually about trial and error and flexibility, because the tools that you need to move through a challenge might be different than the tools that I need. And the tools that you would use to move through this challenge might be different than the tools you would use to move through this other challenge. So it's not, here are the 3 tools. True resilience is the willingness to experiment with different tools, to go through the trial and error process, to reflect. And that is how you kind of achieve a resilient outcome. But it's not a trait that lives within you. And so it's like, even with that, that aligns more with the agility and hardiness definition, which is why I think there is something here, and finding out a good way to talk about it is, to me, exciting. And then the part that like gives me like goosebumps on my arms is, okay, if you use all those definitions, sounds a lot like learning to me. And so it's like, I've been talking about learning kind of on the growth and innovation side. It's like, yeah, get good at learning and you can like make more money and be more creative and get better grades and win more games. But another byproduct of getting good at learning, which is all I care about, that's like what I focus on, is, according to the definition of resilience, getting good at learning will help you become more flexible, which helps you become more resilient. And that's like an unexpected outcome of getting good at getting good.
Okay. So like, I know we try to keep these things at about a half hour, and we had a little stuff at the beginning. So we're approaching the 30-minute mark, but honestly, like, I can see us doing a 2-parter with all of this, because I have like 2 more questions that I really want to ask.
I want to get to those other ones too. So keep it going. I'm good on time. I have nothing else going on.
All right. Well, this one's a personal, like when I saw this on your kind of list of things that you are, what you're all about, I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly. The Pygmalion?
Yeah, I actually think I mispronounce it because in my video I called it the Pygmalion, but I think you're closer. Okay. It's somewhere in between those.
Okay. Tomato. I'm sure depending on where you live in the country or wherever, it's probably different. But what is the Pygmalion effect, and what the heck does that have to do with anything in relation to athletics or coaching?
Okay.
I just need a brief rundown of it.
Okay, so I meet this researcher. He's 90. His name's Robert Rosenthal. And so some people literally call this the Rosenthal effect because he's been researching it since 1958. And some of his research is misunderstood. There's a little bit of controversy around it, but I visited the dude right before the pandemic and spent 2 days with him, and it might have been the coolest 2 days of my life. And so it's like, I think his research is really important. Even though there are misconceptions, understanding the basics is important. And so the idea is, and this is especially for leaders and coaches, our labels and expectations of the people we lead can become true. And in a way, they become self-fulfilling prophecies. It's not magic, and this is just common sense. You don't need to interview Rosenthal to agree with this, that how we think about people kind of changes how we treat them. And so I'm going to talk about the first experiment they ever did, but then I want to give a real life sports example. And between those two things, hopefully we give people a takeaway. First experiment, 1958, Harvard. Rosenthal, he is in charge of a lab that runs experiments on rats. One night, he sneaks into the lab, and on half of the cages of the rats, he puts a sign that says smart rat. On the other half of the cages, he puts a sign that says dumb rat. So they're all obviously the same rats, but half are labeled smart, half are labeled dumb. A group of students comes in, and their job is to take care of the rats for like 10 days. So they feed them and handle them in and out of the cage. And after 10 days, they run the rats through a maze. And the smart rats run through the maze way better than the dumb rats do. Okay, obviously the rats can't read. So this isn't about like their mindset of like, I'm a smart rat, watch me run. It's like, no. But what they discovered, sort of the core of this Rosenthal effect, is the label on the cage becomes true because the students make it become true. So when they analyzed the data, they found, whoa, the students actually treat the smart rats better. They handle them with more care in and out of the cage. They even fed them more. So it was the extra care and support and extra food that helps them run through the maze. But then you take a step back and go, whoa, the label becomes true because they make it become true. And then when I interviewed Rosenthal, he's like, yeah, we've done 500 variations of this study. We've done it in schools. We've done it in corporate groups, whatever. Okay, what's the real life example? In sports. Let's keep it with basketball. Tall people can't dribble. Or aren't very good at dribbling. And you don't have to be a basketball fan. Like, Jarod, I know you're a wrestling guy, but you know this, you see this. Like, you could watch basketball and you're like, yeah, most tall people aren't very good at dribbling. The question is, why? And the answer is not that there's a law of physics that if you're over 6'3", you can't dribble. Because go watch the playoffs tonight. There's 7-footers who are really good at dribbling. So the question is, how come in most levels of basketball, tall people aren't very good at dribbling? It's because we believe tall people can't dribble. And you rewind back to 6th grade basketball. And what do we do with the tallest player? Go stand by the hoop, you get rebounds, you get putbacks, you're the tallest player. That's what you do because tall people can't dribble. And here's the trap. Here's the tough part of Rosenthal's research. We feel like we're right. So like, I'm a basketball coach and I have this idea that tall people can't dribble. I don't really allow them to practice that thing. And then in a game, my my player gets the ball and dribbles it off their foot. And I'm like, yep. Tall people can't dribble. And so it's like, I feel like I'm right. But then what we're not acknowledging is, well, wait, that story, that sort of label is limiting their reps. And that's why they can't dribble. Now, am I saying the tallest player on the team is going to have the ball handling skills of a point guard in one season? No. But what I am saying is the tall player on your team is going to be much better at dribbling a basketball if they're allowed to practice dribbling the basketball. And to me, that's Rosenthal's research playing out in the real world. And you could find examples of that in any classroom, in any corporate group, in any sport. The labels and expectations of the person in charge kind of affecting the development of the people they lead. So now the question is, and I'm kind of like spicy on this topic right now because I just did this in the workshop with the software company. So it's like top of mind. The question is, how do you use this information as a coach, leader, and parent? Now, going into the interview with Rosenthal, I thought I already had the answer to the question. I just wanted him to say it on camera so I could use it in my workshops. Because I'm like, this seems simple that it's like, oh, in raising expectations, you see more progress. So I was like, well, maybe it's as simple as if I'm a math teacher just saying like, yep, everyone in this class is going to get 100% or can get 100% this semester, or everyone on my baseball team is going to bat 300. And I say that out loud to Rosenthal and he kind of laughs at me and he's like, no, that's not the best way to apply this, because just because you provide opportunities and support, equal opportunities and support for everyone on the team or in the classroom doesn't guarantee A's across the board, especially overnight. Like, it takes time. We're going to go at different speeds. And then there's other variables as well. So he goes, don't attach a number to the label. The label you should use is learner, and that's the most important word ever. You might be better at math than me, but we can both get better at math because we're both learners. You might have better ball handling skills than me, but we can both improve on our ball handling skills because we're both learners. So to me, that word holds us accountable. And to me, that's how you apply and utilize Rosenthal's work. So as a coach, I look at the players on my team, and of course they all have their unique strengths and weaknesses. They have their positions. And on top of that, each and every one of them is a learner, and I need to treat them accordingly. And what that means is not putting them in boxes and not telling them you're not cut out for this, or you're not a leader, or you're tall so you can't dribble. It's you're a learner, which means you can get better at these things. And this doesn't mean I'm fake. This isn't me saying, Jarod, you have the best ball handling skills on the team. If that's not true, treating you as a learner is saying like, look, you know, and I know you're not the best at ball handling, but that's a skill. And with some time and some reps and some practice, you could get better at that skill. And I'm here to help. And that's 1,000 times better than you're tall, you can't dribble. Mm-hmm. And so it's like a pretty simple application, which is just understanding that the people that I lead, yes, they're different, but everyone can improve skills if they're allowed to practice, and try to avoid just like putting them in these boxes and robbing them of the reps required to build the skill.
Visually, I feel like, as you were talking, if you were talking to me and I'm an athlete and I'm in a sports scenario, I, for whatever reason, start envisioning doors. And whenever you were making a comment of putting a label on, as a coach, it sounds like you never want to close a door on a kid to the point where now they know I can't go through this door. I can't go through this door. I can't go. This is my only option. This is my only door. And then they start to really pigeonhole themselves into a particular thing. So it feels like just use phrases that keep doors open instead of closing them.
And so to me, it's like none of this is that hard to apply. It's not asking people to change everything they say and do, but it's just, when we're having conversations with athletes or with anyone, talk to them like a learner. What does that mean? Talk about things as skills. So it's not you're a natural at this or you could never do that. It's, hey, you're pretty skilled at that. Or this is a skill that is going to take more practice. And none of this happens overnight, but you're just helping them understand these things are skills that can be built.
Absolutely. It's the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Kind of walk us through what psychological safety is. How does it play a role in athletic culture?
So this is probably the topic that I'm most excited about. And this one, I'm so happy Jarod's here because, dude, we had the same, like, I don't know how to explain this properly, but you might not even remember this. So you used to do like YouTube videos about different topics. And this is like 2019. Mm-hmm. And we did a podcast about psychological safety. And in it, I was like, oh my goodness, why haven't I found this sooner? This is really important. And then I saw you made a similar video of like, yo, psychological safety. This is really important. And I wanted to give you like a virtual high five of like, yeah, dude, I feel the same. So psychological,
it comes from the book that we
Yeah.
both read,
Yeah.
The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been jacked up about it since then. And it's also cool because I just published a video about it with Amy Edmondson, who is like the main researcher. So we worked together and made like a 15-minute explainer video. And it's probably the best video we've ever made. And so we'll put that in like the notes or whatever. We can send people
for
the
sure.
link. But in a nutshell, psychological safety is the feeling that I can be myself. It's the feeling that I can try new things, make mistakes, ask for help, ask a question. Not that I'm being reckless, trying to mess up. It's just the feeling that it's okay to do those things. Everyone listening has felt that before, most likely, whether we're familiar with the term or not. And definitely everyone listening has been in situations where we didn't feel that before, whether familiar with the term or not. Now, why does it matter? Is study after study after study shows it's one of the most effective predictors of better group learning and better group performance, that you can measure psychological safety within a team, and teams that score higher in that will learn better, perform better than teams that don't. And that goes for pretty much any industry. They've done this in healthcare. They've done this in sports. They've done this in school. Google did a huge research project on this. So it's like, just like Jarod, you felt it when you first got exposed to it. I felt it too. This matters a ton. Now, a lot of research shows that it matters, but I think there's a lot of room for figuring out how to build it, like a lot of room. And that's kind of why I reached out to Edmondson to get her take on like, all right, we know that this is important. How do you build it? And in her book, in the Culture Code, and in her book, The Fearless Organization, she talks a lot about different strategies. But the one, honestly, that I spend the most time on, and when we do our workshops now, this is kind of the only one I talk about. Modeling vulnerability builds psychological safety. And once a leader understands that simple formula, I think it's one of the most important things we could understand. And all this is human nature. Like, we see it every day. So at the end of a meeting or presentation, we ask for questions. And what happens more times than not? Room full of people. Does anyone have a question? No one raises their hand. And then 5 seconds or 10 seconds go by, someone raises their hand. And what happens next? 25 people raise their hand. This is human nature. This is psychological safety at play. But what it's showing is one person being vulnerable, one person being courageous and asking a question actually improves the climate for the people in the room and builds a bit more safety, where now more people feel like they can ask a question. So by modeling vulnerability, we can actually impact the environment around us. Another great example of this, I do a lot of work with the U.S. women's volleyball team, and leading up to the Olympics in Japan, they did this. So every 2 weeks, every player and every coach goes to this big whiteboard, and they call it Declaration Day. And everyone writes down the skill that they're going to be intentional about building for those 2 weeks. Every coach writes something down, every player writes something down. Now, obviously, that helps the individuals build those skills, because by being more intentional with this skill, I'm getting more from the drills and practice. But when I talked to Karch, their head coach, he goes, that made a big shift in the learning environment. And what happened is, by doing that, everyone's kind of in the trenches now. It's like, I'm focused on getting better. And now there's a lot of models, and that can kind of compound and build safety. And the last example I'll leave people with is Karch, the head coach of the team. He's famous for setting up lots of one-on-one meetings with his players. And he was doing this back in like 2015 when I was first out in Anaheim. And at the end of every meeting, every one-on-one meeting, he looks the player in the eye and he asks the same question every time. He goes, how can I be better for you? And at first I was just kind of impressed with that question, and it would lead to some good conversation. He'd get some good feedback. But what I didn't connect until I learned about psychological safety and modeling is, wait, what he's actually doing when he asks that question is modeling. So like, imagine that you play for him, and every time he meets with you, he's asking you for feedback. Hey, how could I be better for you? How could I be better for you? It's now safer for you to ask him for feedback someday. So it's like, whoa, that is a strategy and framework that each and every one of us could use. It's, what are the actions that I want to see more of from the people around me? How can I start to put some of these actions on display? And in doing that, I create an environment where people are like more likely to do the same. Now, we're talking to sports coaches. This is something that we did talk about with the Phillies, and Cece Kraft is their lead mental training coach. She's like my best learning friend. We talk all the time about this stuff. And she's like, what coaches kind of misunderstand when they learn about modeling is they think only about surface level modeling, which is, here's how to do the skill. But she's like, guess what? I can't do that because I can't hit a 95 mile an hour fastball. Like, I can't model that for you at all. So, and it's like true for a lot of us. It's like, yo, I can't model the Euro step anymore, but
Speak for yourself, Trevor. I mean, come on.
yeah, but it's, think of modeling as something bigger and more vulnerable, which is the learning process itself. The willingness to try something new, how we respond to a setback, the willingness to receive feedback. Like, all those things are things that we can model, and all those things help the people around us more than we know. And so when I even do workshops with leaders specifically, yeah, we do talk a lot about the Pygmalion effect. We talk a lot about psychological safety, but every time where we land is, look, it's really important for us as individuals to engage in this learning process, and putting ourselves in that zone and taking our learning and skill development seriously is not only good for us, but that is putting us in a position where we're now a better model for the people around us. Can I add one more thing to this? This is new. This is what wasn't even on the thing that I sent you.
So exclusive here, huh?
I learned this one. I learned this one yesterday. So
let me start a new page.
So this, again, I'm in podcasting mode, so there's so many topics. This is great for me, actually. I should pay you for this. This is like my testing ground for my podcast. So, okay. I find this researcher named Ting Zhang. She's really young. She's from Harvard, and she studies what she calls the expert's curse. This is kind of similar to what a lot of people have heard of, which is the curse of knowledge. Like, it's in the Heath brothers books, like Made to Stick, whatever. So the curse of knowledge, or the expert's curse, is actually the more we know about a particular topic, usually the worse we get at explaining it, and the worse we are at teaching it to a novice. And so Ting does a bunch of experiments that shows that expert curse exists. And you see this in the sports world, that more times than not, the best player isn't the best coach. And what happens is, like, because I'm really, really good at playing, sometimes I forget what it's like to be a newbie or not be good at something. And I'm not really good at connecting, especially with a novice. So I like her work because she shows what the expert's curse is, but then she's been doing experiments about how do you, like, avoid it. And so this experiment's sweet. They take expert guitar players. Half of them are the control group. So they come in, they're all really good at playing guitar, and then their job is, all right, one-on-one coaching session with a novice. The other half spends 2 minutes playing the guitar with their offhand. So flip it over. If you're right-hand, play left-handed for 2 minutes. And then they go do the same thing, one-on-one coaching with a novice. And at the end of the session, they survey the novices, and they ask about, how did your coach connect with you? How was the training session? What did you learn? All this stuff. And the novices that were coached by the experts that had to flip the guitar, they score those coaches so much higher. And what they found in study after study is simply by putting an expert into novice mode, where they remember that it's uncomfortable to learn something new, where they remember that sometimes it's frustrating, that creates a little bit more empathy. And now I'm in a better position to teach a novice. Now, how does that connect to the conversation we just had about psychological safety? I think they work like this. So what I'm saying with psychological safety is, by putting ourselves in the learning environment, by building skills, not only am I getting better at stuff, but I'm also modeling that for my people. But then an unexpected byproduct of that is I'm kind of avoiding the expert's curse, because I'm in the learning trenches and I'm reminded of what it feels like and the frustrations involved. And now I'm actually better at connecting with my athletes. And so I don't think of this expert's curse as like another thing that we have to really do and think about, but simply by taking our learning seriously, that's another thing that we're kind of sidestepping. And so I think there's like a cool connection there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that was actually another thing that I wanted to ask about, honestly, but I was like, oh, I think we got enough to talk about. Maybe I'll save it for another time. But I'm glad you brought it up, because it does make a lot of sense. And that whole switching the guitar thing and trying to go into novice mode, I've obviously being in youth coaching, you're always trying to pull in other parents, to try to help coach if they have any kind of working knowledge of that sport. And so the number one thing that I always heard from some of those, and I'll just use youth wrestling as example, you get the dads that did wrestling when they were middle school, high school, and I was like, oh, great, come help out, we'd love to have you, because let's be real, I don't know how long I'm going to coach for, if I'm going to make a career out of it. But the number one thing I always hear from them is, man, I remember how to do this stuff, but I'm not good at explaining it, like they're just, and so I think, that simple tip of how to be a novice once again helps you find the verbiage and the words and the pattern of language in order to explain things in fundamental ways.
Right. And that's the sweet spot. So it's obviously having the background knowledge is good, as long as we're not allowing it to create the expert's curse. So it's like, I want something to explain. So that middle ground is, I remember what it's like to be a novice, and then I have this knowledge that I've developed throughout my life, and now I can use that properly, but I can do that with empathy because I remember what it's like to be a newbie. And so we're not saying, actually, go hire people that don't know what wrestling is, and they won't have the expert's curse. It's like...
Well, and the hard part is too, like, I'm not trying to stereotype or label I'm not trying to label, but wrestlers, usually when they grow into be adults, you have a lot of wrestlers that go into the field of like construction and other things where, yes, there's learning, but the language being used to develop that learning is much more intense. And so getting those kinds of adults to come back down to a level of kids is sometimes really hard, because I guess the advice that I try to use them, I said, think like a kindergarten teacher. Like, you're going to have to be that patient, and you're going to have to use language like that that is going to relate to the kids and help it break it down, because 100%. It's at least that's the mindset that even though I'm coaching a 6th grader, I'm still using language and explaining moves for the first time as a kindergarten teacher. So
dude, I do that. I presented to the freaking United Nations learning managers, and I prepped for that session, like, how would I explain this to a 7th grader? So I think that's that's a mindset we should always take. It's like universal language, crystal clear communication, good storytelling, like talk to people like humans, because like that's how we like make a change and connect with people, not by like flexing our vocab, not by like overcomplicating stuff. And so it doesn't matter if it's a group of like 3rd grade wrestlers or a group of like high like achieving adults. It's like, I think the same approach works every time. It's like, get into that mode, connect with the audience, use normal words, and talk like a human.
Yep.
Yeah.
I feel like they should rename the expert curse the Doug Peterson effect. Jacksonville head coach. He was back up the farm for a decade. I mean, he's won coach of the year multiple times. Favre's not doing that.
Well, we've been at this for an hour, man. Craig, is there any last final things that you want to ask? I know that I've kind of been hogging all the time here.
Oh, I love hearing it. I think one of the big things for me, when thinking about coaching and talking to coaches, and really not just talking to the veteran coaches, but also talking to the people who are either deciding to become a coach or they've made the decision and they're just kind of starting to do the legwork, to make it official so that they can coach. If you could go back and talk to yourself, 10 days before your first coaching gig, what are some things that you'd kind of tell yourself and kind of walk us through mentally where somebody who's going into that should be?
When we're doing something new, this is human nature. When we're doing something new, something we care about, and there's that uncertainty, we feel uncomfortable. And more times than not, when we feel uncomfortable, we seek comfort. And when it comes to coaching, I did this, and this is common everywhere. You feel weird, especially when you're a newbie, and then you seek comfort. And comfort is, do it how I did it, which is like, I go look at my first basketball practice as a coach. It's the same drills that I ran in high school with the same names, the same everything, because I was uncomfortable. And it's like, I know this, we're just going to do this. But there's nothing wrong with that. But that sort of creates a recycling effect of like, I'm never really thinking about why do I do this drill? I'm doing this drill because I know the terminology and know how to explain it because I did it for 4 years in high school. And so it's just trying to interrupt that cycle and not just doing things the way that I've always done them because I feel uncomfortable. And it doesn't happen overnight, but just like starting from square one of like, what are we trying to get done? What is the value of this drill? And just allowing yourself the time and patience to kind of experiment and trial and error with maybe different drills and different plays and different ways of treating players that aren't just like kind of the path of least resistance, which is, well, this is how my coach coached me.
Well, that does it for this episode of the Level Up Learning Show from my back porch. And next time, I don't know where I'm going to be. Maybe I'll be in a boat. Maybe I'll be on a beach somewhere in the woods. I have no idea. It's summertime, and we're going to get out and about, and we'll find out where we'll be next time. But thank you for joining us this time. If you want to check out any of the resources from this episode, you can certainly do that at the web address that we have down below, or please comment, reach out. Maybe there's some insights that you had, some questions that you had from this particular episode. And if there was, be sure to reach out to us at our social media platforms where you can certainly post those there. And maybe, hopefully, we can respond back to you and start a nice dialogue. So we'll see you next time on the Level Up Learning Show.